Welcome in to another edition of the All Things Bama Podcast, powered by BamaCentral.com, your Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation affiliate for all Alabama Crimson Tide news. I'm your host, Tyler Martin, and I'm joined with two Bama Central staff writers today. The newest one, Tony Tsoukalas, and then Katie Windham as well. Guys, we're doing something a little new here. We're trying to get more people involved with this. We have some people contributing to the site. So instead of just really one, on each episode, I'm trying to branch out, make it two, maybe even three. So I'm glad you both are on here. We're going to dive into, some recruiting as it just wrapped up officially the 2022 cycle. The heavy lifting's been done for the most part, some Alabama basketball, and then some off the field things that are going on with the Crimson Tide football program. But glad you both are on here.
Yeah. Happy to be on, Tyler.
Yeah, it's been a minute for me, obviously going out of the country, getting married, honeymoon, it was great and all, but it's trying to, get caught up and get refreshed on everything that's going on because, Katie, it seems like, this offseason for Alabama already, it seems like something's going on every single day. On Thursday afternoon, the announcement, plans are to move forward with the new basketball arena. The same day, Pete Golding, Alabama's defensive coordinator, gets a DUI. It seems like this offseason already has just been kind of crazy.
Yeah, it hasn't really been a slow off season so far for the beat writers between, the stuff you just mentioned, the crazy news this week, plus all the recruiting stuff with National Signing Day being yesterday, even though National Signing Day has kind of lost a little bit of its luster with that early signing day back in December. And then, we got basketball going on in Tuscaloosa too. So it's not been a slow off season so far, and it's just going to continue to pick up steam as we're finishing off these winter sports, and then literally the spring sports, baseball and softball, start within the next 2 weeks. So,
and we haven't even spoke about maybe the impending Bill O'Brien stuff that could happen. I could throw a whole different wrench into all of this, and maybe Alabama's going to be looking for an offensive coordinator, perhaps. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that could happen. And it's really kind of late in the game now to go find another replacement, especially for a position that big. So I know there's a lot of Alabama fans hoping that, Bill O'Brien leaves, but I'm not sure that's the best thing for Alabama.
Yeah, right after you just have signed all these recruits, and even last Saturday at the Alabama Baylor basketball game, they had kind of like a recruiting section right behind press row, and Bill O'Brien and Pete Golding were both there with guys. And so, now they're already signed, so it's not like guys are going to leave probably, but at this point it is, however you felt about Bill O'Brien's play calling last season, it's a little late in the game to be switching out offensive coordinators.
And you have such an important offense next year. You're returning a Heisman Trophy winner, you have the possibility. You brought in Jermaine Burton, who, I've heard great things about. Jahmyr Gibbs was the best running back in the portal. You want to have somebody, you don't want to throw a new guy with this offense if you can help it. So I think having an established guy, a familiar guy for a second straight year is going to help, Bryce Young. It's also going to help kind of, lead this offense, which I think could be really good.
Something I was thinking about, and this is a great place to start on this kind of some staff moves and things like that. If Bill O'Brien was to leave and the Patriots' job seems most likely the offensive coordinator replacing Josh McDaniels, who he replaced when Josh McDaniels took the Broncos job, so many years ago. Alabama has so many analysts. They obviously employ the largest coaching staff in the country. I've always just kind of wondered if it's this late, because this would be the latest kind of coaching hire Nick Saban's really had to do on his staff, honestly. Would they just promote somebody from the inside? You know what I mean? Like, the first name that comes to mind is the guy, Alex Mortensen, who's been there for so many years as an offensive analyst. I wonder if, Bill O'Brien did leave, if it would just be like, okay, it's maybe promote internally. What do you guys think about that?
Mortensen would be an interesting one. He's basically like, if Bill O'Brien was to be, if he had missed the Cotton Bowl with COVID, it was going to be Mortensen that was going to step up. He's kind of been like the quarterback whisperer kind of guy for Alabama. So if you want somebody that, knows the offense, I think that would be, a good option, but maybe also like a safety net. If you don't get somebody else, at least you have a guy like that in-house that you could go turn to. I think Alabama, you look at what Nick Saban has done, it's going to be more probably like a more established guy than Mortensen, I would think. You've seen him take guys out of the NFL or somebody that's called an offense on a regular basis. I just, that would kind of surprise me, just because, this is a huge job, and I'm not saying that he couldn't handle it, but I think you can get more established names. I'm not saying even better, maybe, but like just more established names.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I feel like it'd be a pretty big jump from being an analyst to the offensive coordinator at Alabama. not even like being a position coach, which like, I'm not saying it's not possible, but when you're going from an NFL head coach to position to someone who's never been technically an on the field coach, I feel like would be a pretty big jump, but I feel like he's a name I've heard a little bit about. So, maybe a name to look out for, but of course all this, is still hypothetical right now. And if Bill O'Brien even takes the job, which by the time this video or podcast releases, he could be somewhere else. You never know how fast these things can change.
Yeah, and too, you mentioned if it's going to be an easier jump, if it is promotion inside, from a position to coordinator, you look at a guy Holman Wiggins who's been there for a few years now too. That's just something I thought about. But maybe hopefully, Alabama might not have to go through another transition period like that, and they can retain both coordinators. And Pete Golding, let's talk about him for a second. Thursday morning, getting a DUI. He just released a statement as we're recording this. Talking about how he didn't uphold the values of the University of Alabama and all of that. And a lot of people were talking about him losing his job. Obviously, drinking and driving is terrible. It's irresponsible, especially with someone who has so much money. I mean, he's one of the highest paid coordinators in America. Like it's dumb. It's stupid. There should be a punishment, but he's not getting fired. Right. And I was telling you guys before this that, I thought Pete Golding in the 2022 recruiting class and even 2021 as well, he's been the guy. Like he has been on it. He has been one of Saban's like ace recruiters on this staff, but you definitely hate to see the DUI, and hopefully, he can get that turned around.
Yeah, look, you've seen Nick Saban give second chances, and so this is going to be, he's not a guy that likes to just throw people out. I'm sure there's going to be some discipline. I'm sure there's going to be some talking and, taking the right steps to help Pete Golding kind of get over this and learn from this and progress from this. Cause who knows, maybe this is a problem. I trust that, the right measures are probably going to be taken into account there. But yeah, as far as the guy losing his job, I would be surprised if Alabama moves on from Pete Golding because of this. I would think it's more a case of, a harsh, consequences in-house, stuff like that. Maybe some requirements. Now, if he does, I think if you did see Pete Golding let go, it would probably signify something bigger than just this. We don't necessarily know everything that's gone on behind the scenes, but if it's this, one instance, or if it's something that Alabama and Nick Saban feels that, Pete can grow off of, I think they're going to try to take that avenue.
Yeah, Nick Saban did just speak really highly of Pete Golding yesterday during the National Signing Day press conference about his ability to develop relationships with players and how they all really like him and trust him. And so, you hate to see something like this. And like Tony said, Nick Saban, is pretty good to give people second chances. I was talking with people earlier today. I don't know if a situation like this has happened in the past with an assistant coach. Obviously, we've seen a lot of players through the years get arrested for DUI. And so it is a little more serious, him being an adult and an employee at the university. But I don't expect any super drastic measures to be taken unless, like Tony said, there's more that comes out.
Yeah, no doubt. And I completely agree with you guys. And too, just to kind of speak on Pete, I mentioned kind of the ace recruiter aspect of it, but Alabama landed 4 players from Louisiana this cycle. And one I want to touch on, is Danny Lewis, one who they just added on National Signing Day, which it has lost its luster. And I hate that. And I wish the recruiting calendars could change. I hate the early signing period now. I don't know about how you guys feel about that, but the early signing period to me just takes away the drama. It takes away just kind of the allure of what this day meant to so many people across the country. And Danny Lewis, a tight end who was originally committed to Cincinnati, decommits late last month in January, and then really picks up steam. And Brian Kelly's dance moves, I know you talked about him a lot, Tony. They didn't win him over, but I think it's interesting about this is the fact that, okay, this was really Brian Kelly and Nick Saban's first head-to-head recruiting battle since Kelly's gotten to Baton Rouge. And,
it is.
And he failed. And Kelly failed in that aspect because you've got a guy already in your backyard and you guys offered before Alabama did, and you're trying to build the relationships. You do the viral dancing and it didn't work out. You fell flat on your face.
Yeah. Look, if both teams needed a tight end as well, that's a huge part of this too. Alabama, after seeing Jaleel Skinner leave, they were kind of looking for that more complete tight end. I think Amari Black is going to be a really good tight end. I expect him to be the best or most talented of the 3 that they brought in. But Danny Lewis was a real need. We talked about on the site today of just Alabama needed that complete tight end, and they were trying to look in the portal, and they couldn't get it in the portal. There's not an option currently available in the portal that kind of fits that need. So it was a big thing for both Alabama and LSU at the tight end position, and Alabama was able to pull that through. And I think we're going to see, obviously, like you said, a lot of battles between Nick Saban and Brian Kelly. I know Brian Kelly can recruit, and say what you want about the dancing. I'm sure that sells to certain recruits as well. And so like it's goofy, and it's, I mean, I don't know if I'd like it if I was a recruit, but there's a reason why they're doing that. And like what Nick Saban said is, everybody, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? So if it's working, he'll continue to do that, but it's hard to go head to head with Nick Saban. And I think we saw that, we saw that Alabama was able to kind of flex its muscle in a position of need and get, I know it's not the most high profile recruit, but it's definitely one that Alabama needed. So, I mean, like, throw out stars or rankings. I mean, like, Alabama really wanted this person. LSU really wanted this person. Florida really wanted this person, and Alabama got it. So that just shows you, Pete Golding, Nick Saban, the recruiting prowess that they had, that they went and offered a kid late and got him.
Yeah, and you made a great point about it, Tony. And no disrespect to, I mean, rankings, they're all subjective, right? And no offense, like, Danny Lewis isn't some top tier prospect coming out of high school, right? I mean, he's looked at as a developmental piece, a guy who down the road can really make an impact, right? And so, this wasn't, a 5-star kid who was in LSU's backyard who they missed on. I mean, it was a kid who deep down should have probably ended up at LSU at the end of the day, but there was other plans. Another thing I want to hit on, guys, Alabama finishes number 2 behind A&M. So Jimbo Fisher goes off, right? I mean, he's sitting there, saying, "Oh, since these comments about, A&M paid for their recruiting class, they're insensitive, they're insulting to all this hard work that has been put forth by his staff." And Katie, I don't know about you, but when I was listening to Jimbo Fisher, if you really think, okay, this is your 5th recruiting class at A&M, you signed 7 5-stars, you hadn't signed more than 3 in any other class, right? And you only have an 8-4 season, and somehow you still end up with 7, and NIL gets introduced in the first full cycle, you get 7. Something's a little fishy. And then by the way he was acting in the press conference, rather than just saying, hey, boasting about, hey, this is what we did, this is what hard work we put into it. It was more so of, let me try to just defend, right? And that, to me, that puts off kind of some guilt.
I don't know. I'm going to step in. I don't know if that's the case. I think he's probably, this is the first time that A&M's won a top recruiting class, and he has to now hear about NIL. And look, I think that the point that Jimbo Fisher was trying to make, now, did he handle it the best? Probably not. But the point he's trying to make is, everyone has these same rules. We're not doing anything that different than anybody else is doing. And, we just did something that's big for the program, and is, let us celebrate the way that, you would with Alabama. And to be honest with you, Texas A&M had this really good class, but so did Georgia and so did Alabama. And even if they did get an advantage of NIL, the difference between A&M's class and the difference between Alabama's class, or the difference between Georgia's class, is very minuscule. It's not going to be the difference in the Aggies winning over the Bulldogs or over the Crimson Tide. Like, it's just, there's 3 elite classes, in my opinion, in this recruiting cycle. And, so that the A&M had the most 5-stars, but, only 11 people are allowed on the field. And in today's climate, are all those people going to play? And if they don't play right away, are they going to transfer? That's the same thing with Alabama and Georgia. I think you're going to start seeing less patience among some of these players. So it's not just about bringing in, 5 stars, and it's not just about NIL. I mean, look, I think when you're evaluating these classes, let's not also forget that Alabama brought in Jermaine Burton and Eli Ricks and Jahmyr Gibbs, and 3 of the best transfers in the portal. That it almost has to be considered now into recruiting, because that's going to happen every single year. Yeah. So I know that there's a lot of concern about Texas A&M and whether or not, the NIL is going to change college football. If it does, and that's an advantage that Texas A&M can kind of take advantage of, I don't think it's going to go out of control. I think there'll be regulations placed on NIL after a while, once we get more of a feel of it. And I don't think that, it's going to ruin the sport like I think a lot of people are worried it's going to. And I don't necessarily think A&M's doing anything wrong, or that they're really getting that much of an advantage. I don't.
And before you say something, Katie, I do want to rebuttal. No, I do agree. I don't think A&M is doing anything wrong at all, right? Because you go back and look at Jimbo's comments on Feinbaum 2 months ago, right? He was saying that NIL is just, it's above the table, right? Rather than underneath the table. And then when 2 months later, when you come back and then you say, oh, well, we weren't doing that, right? But then you were saying, okay, it's above the table. They're all dealing with the same things, right? All these coaches, they're dealing with new stress. That's why this offseason feels so dramatic and all of this now, right? Because there's just new things popping up each and every day. It's one of the things, with Sal Sinceri moving over to special assistant to the head coach, right? Because Coach Saban talked about how, it's all dealing with all the new things that this game presents, right? As it evolves, he's going to help out in that area. I just think too, I don't have an issue with what A&M did or at what they're alleged to do at all. I do think what it correlates to is this. Now that A&M is next in line, right, to win a national championship eventually, because Georgia did it this year, right? And they had a number one class, and they were kind of that class. Okay, they were kind of known as, okay, well, they can't get it done. They can recruit at an elite level, but they couldn't get it done. Now you look at the last number one classes, right? It was Georgia, Alabama, Clemson. All these teams have won number one classes, and they've also won national titles. So we'll see if A&M can do that. What do you have to say, Katie?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can go or look at all the stuff yesterday or the last 2 days really between Jimbo and Lane Kiffin and Nick Saban and their comments about NIL and recruiting. But kind of Tony, your point about if, for A&M, does it give them that much of an advantage, or can it with NIL? If there is an advantage in recruiting with NIL, Alabama can use that as well. Alabama has a lot of money. Nick Saban has the power and influence. Alabama fans, if you're worried about A&M, Alabama could, there's not maybe as much money in Alabama as there is at A&M, but there's still enough that they can get the people that they want. And so however this shakes out, I think it's really just a lot of coaches now, especially Saban, want some form of legislation. Or Saban was saying yesterday that he doesn't want NIL to be a reason that someone goes to a school, but if that starts becoming the reason that people go to certain schools, then they'll start using that to recruit them. And so Saban's little, or people say ABC always be recruiting, and I think we saw a lot of that from him yesterday, even with going back to Danny Lewis when he was talking about him saying, and you'll talk about the battles with Brian Kelly that are going to come up in the future. Saban's little comment about he loves the people in South Louisiana. They're so nice. He's a master at what he does. We all know this. We've all seen it. There's a reason why he's won more national championships than anyone else. But also, Tyler, what you're saying is a really good point. I think you're bringing up about we've seen the schools that have gotten the top recruiting class and how eventually it can translate to national championships. And so we'll see if Jimbo is able to do the same thing at A&M.
Katie, on that point, yeah, and I agree with you. Look, NIL is kind of a gray area, right? And so it's kind of the Wild West right now until people know more about it, until you can kind of make more case studies about what's going on. It's hard to put these rules in place. There's still feelers going on, but Nick Saban's going to be able to adapt. Consider it, driving, right? If you're speeding and you're going under 10 miles an hour, chances are you're not going to get pulled over. Now I feel like with NIL, you're moving on to the highway, right? So maybe now you can go 15 over, maybe you can go 17 over. Now, if you get caught or if you go out of control, the penalty is going to be a lot higher, but there's still that gray zone. And people like Nick Saban, like Jimbo Fisher, like Brian Kelly, they're going to be able to navigate and know what they can do and what they can't do. And until, the regulations get a little bit more strict, I think you're just going to have people maybe bend it here and bend it there, but don't kid yourself. It's not just going to be Jimbo, and it's not just going to be, Nick Saban or Lane Kiffin, or everyone's going to be doing that. It's just, I think with NIL, until he gets things, kind of more of an understanding, that gray area, that ability that you're kind of able to speed is going to be greater. And it's just going to be a little bit of a shady gray area, but I don't think anything's going to get out of control. It's just, I think it's like what you said is you want to have an experienced coach like Nick Saban that knows what he's doing to keep things, above board, but also make sure that he doesn't go too far or, break it, a rule that's going to get Alabama in trouble. And I think you've seen he's been able to take advantage of any kind of situation or any change in college football. He's been able to persevere.
Yeah, we definitely need uniform legislation, right, from a federal level on this. And these spats that we're seeing now in the media, which Kiffin's comment I found hilarious, about how A&M and Texas need to probably be paying a luxury tax like an NFL team does. I found that really comical, right? that, like all these little jabs, I mean, you can just tell, like, so, I mean, including this season, I mean, it is going to really ramp up on the field. And now, these guys, I know they're cordial with one another in the media and stuff like that, but you can just kind of tell. I mean, it's really starting to get in your face, and I love it. Right, I love the drum. I mean, this is what makes college football so much fun, when we have coaches calling out one another in the media. But real quick, before we get on basketball, I do want to hit one more thing on football. The transfers. I'm glad you brought them up, Tony, because the last time, before we did a last podcast, Jermaine Burton now is a member of the Alabama Crimson Tide. I'm glad you mentioned him. I saw a lot of hot takes. I don't even know if you can call it hot, but I saw a lot of takes about, okay, could he be what Jamison Williams was to this team in 2021, right, in 2022? What do you guys think about the addition of getting him, from Georgia? And who do you think is going to be the most important transfer out of these three, with Gibbs, Ricks, and Burton?
Most important is interesting because I don't necessarily know if it's going to be the best. But I think if I went most important, I go Eli Ricks, who could end up being the best too, but you need that starting role. And I think they really needed some experience, especially with losing two starters in Josh Jobe and Jalen Armour-Davis. Now, I know they pretty much return a starter with Kool-Aid McKinstry because he's had so much experience, but I don't think you want to go too young and inexperienced. So probably most important, I would go Eli Ricks, but best, I think I'd go Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, nobody on Alabama is winning the Heisman this year. I think it's just, with Bryce Young, I think he'd be competing against himself. It's hard to win the Heisman 2 years in a row, and then you're not going to have somebody not named Bryce Young on Alabama's offense win the Heisman. But I think on a normal year for Alabama, that without this, kind of elite quarterback that they've had in the recent years, a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs would be somebody that you'd put in that Heisman mix. I think he's got super talent. He's a guy that can, contribute in all parts of the game as a receiver. He was the highest graded running back receiving grade from Pro Football Focus. He's obviously a good running back. I really like him. I think he's going to be the starter at running back. And I know that Alabama's going to spread it out, but I wouldn't be surprised if he gets the majority of the carries next year. And then Burton, I think, gives experience to a young receiving room. And I put him third on this list, but I mean, he's still going to be a very important part, probably end up being Alabama's leading receiver. So all three of them are very crucial in my opinion.
Yeah. First, to counter your point about no Heisman, I think you're giving a little disrespect to Will Anderson there, because I think it'll be really hard for an Alabama player to win it 3 years in a row. But
that's another thing. Yeah.
I agree with no one else on offense probably could win besides Bryce. And I was originally going to say Gibbs is the most important one because, if you're losing your leading rusher and B-Rob, and then you're going to have other people coming back from injury, so you just don't really know where they're going to be at. You already lost Kamar Wheaton and, Trey Sanders. Who knows what he'll do. But then really, I mean, it's all three of those positions. Like you're saying, I mean, you laid out the case for Ricks and then really Burton too. You lost all your top three receivers. And so, I mean, that's the reason why Saban went and got these guys out of the portal. They were all meeting positions of need that are, lacking a little bit of experience or lost a lot of experience from this year's team. And so I think all three will step into those roles and be big additions for this team.
Yeah, most important, it's really close between Burton and Ricks. I'll go Burton just because you guys said you said Gibbs and you said and you were talking about Ricks, Tony. But for me with Jermaine Burton, right? I mean, we saw in the national championship game what the Alabama offense. I mean, obviously very young. Some guys really had to step up. Jai Hall, there were some drops. Ja'Cory Brooks, we saw what he could do, right? In the Iron Bowl, we saw it in the Cincinnati game as well. But for Jermaine Burton, a guy who, coming over, you look at his numbers. I mean, 400 yards is Georgia's leading receiver. I know Brock Bowers was technically their leading receiver, but in terms of wide receivers, Jermaine Burton was the guy. And kind of just what he provides. I mean, as a guy who has some speed, he has some physicality to him. I think in that room, he's so important. Last year, I thought coming into it, Alabama's wide receiver room as a whole was maybe not inexperienced, but they were unproven outside of John Mechie, right? Like everyone was talking about Slade Bolden being that guy. And sure, Slade Bolden had some nice moments in this past season and back in the 2020 national championship year, but they were unproven, right, for the most part. This year, when you look at that, I mean, that wide receiver room is depleted, absolutely depleted. And maybe, Slade Bolden, maybe he'll see that, he maybe should have stayed potentially. But anyway, I think Jermaine Burton is the guy who is going to provide, I guess, or be the most valuable transfer this cycle. Moving on to basketball, Alabama coming off of a 100-81 loss against Auburn inside Auburn Arena on Tuesday night. Tough scene there. Alabama's got Kentucky, right? They're finishing this 3-game stretch, which is absolutely brutal. I've looked at a lot of other teams, top team schedules in the country, and I haven't found a tougher stretch than this one, right? Number 4, Baylor, number 1, Auburn, number 5, Kentucky. This is as hard as it gets. Now, Alabama, if you would have told me Alabama gets 2 out of 3, I mean, that to me right there is just a win in itself. So what do you guys take away from Tuesday night going into Saturday?
Tuesday, I was down in Auburn Arena along with one of our interns, Blake, and Alabama came out of the gate strong in that game at the under 16 timeout. They played really good defense those first 4 minutes. It was intense. They weren't maybe converting shots on the other end, and then they kind of held a lead for the first part of the game, and then all of a sudden you blink and Auburn's up double digits. They got up by 19 in that first half, and then Alabama made some threes right before the half to cut it down to like 11, I think. And then, out of the half, they come out hot again. JQ and Shaq are just hitting shots left and right. They cut the lead down to 2, and then you blink and Auburn's up double digits again. So, I mean, I think part of that was just showing how good of a team Auburn is. Alabama cannot compare to them depth-wise. When Auburn goes to the bench, there's not really a huge drop-off when Alabama does. There is, and even probably all 5 Alabama starters aren't necessarily on the same level as Auburn's. But I think there were some good things to take away from that game. Nate Oates in the postgame was really proud of the starting 5 and how they competed in the first and second half. I think it was good for them to see some 3-point shots finally start falling at a higher level, even though, ultimately it was still not even anywhere close to enough against Auburn. But also think there's some guys that are going to want to, particularly J.D. Davison, that didn't have a great game, that are going to want to prove something on Saturday against Kentucky. And as we've seen this year, these are the type of games this Alabama team normally competes best in. And so I think it'll be a great environment for basketball on Saturday, a packed out Coleman Coliseum, and an energized team that's ready to go on Saturday.
Yeah, I think about this Alabama basketball team when I look at it is that it's got some serious holes that I just don't know how it's going to overcome. It's a team that on its day can shoot lights out, and that's how they beat Gonzaga. But on the same hand, you look at this Auburn game, I mean, Alabama doesn't have a post presence. I think Charles Bediako is a talented kid, and I think he's going to be better, but he needs to put on some weight. He's got to be more of a presence. You can't, and then there's nobody really after him that can help. So, I mean, if he's not doing it, who are you going to have as that post presence? Gurley is more of an outside guy. You've got Juwan Gary who can kind of put in a shift, but I mean, he's small when you come talking about having a big guy. I mean, Alex Chico, it seems like Alabama kind of, isn't believing in him for whatever reason, and he didn't seem to work out. Keon Ambrose Hilton hasn't really done anything since coming here, so they don't have the bigs. And while I think Charles Bediako has a future, I don't necessarily think in the next couple of months he's just going to change his game. So Alabama's going to have to rely even more on the outside shot, and they're not that dependable there either. I mean, on their day, they can shoot lights out, but you look at Javon Quinterly, he can be hot and cold. I think, you get a different Keon Ellis. I mean, when Keon Ellis is on, then yeah, you can almost kind of like forget about Herb Jones. Like you're getting that kind of defensive player, and then he's actually, he can hit some threes himself and provide some offense. But when Keon Ellis, there's like 2 different Keon Ellises, and when you get the bad one, it's a huge liability. And there's a lot. You could say the same thing about Javon Quinterly this season. And it's funny. I think, from what I've seen from Alabama fans, the critiques have been all on Jaden Shackelford. Man, if you take Jaden Shackelford out of this team, I'm not sure, I'm not sure it's going to the tournament. Like, I'm serious. I think if you took him out, I've heard, I don't know if it's just overreacting Alabama fans are, if they actually feel this way, but I've heard, a couple of times, oh man, I wish he wouldn't have came back. If he didn't come back, you can kiss the tournament goodbye. I mean, where would this team be without Jaden Shackelford? And I think they're going to have to rely on him. And I think you're just going to need more consistency from Javon Quinterly and Keon Ellis. And then you're just going to have to hope that you can get by without having a post game, because even with the development of Charles Bediako, I don't know if that's going to be enough. So you're going to have to play to your strengths there, but you're also going to need more consistency in what you are strong at.
Yeah, and it's all going to come down to the matchups when we get into March, and you guys know that. But yeah, Tony, you make some great points about the post presence. I mean, Charles Bediako, I thought at the beginning of the year, right, when Angry Chuck was coming alive, when he was protecting the rim, I thought he was playing really good basketball. I thought the first 4 minutes of the game against Auburn when Alabama cut it from 16-2, I thought that was his best 4 minutes of the season and Javon Quinley's best 4 minutes of the season right there. And that little spurt that got them back into that game because Chuck was playing angry. He was, he was attacking the rim because a lot of times he just looks timid to me. He just looks like he's scared. And we'll see what happens on Saturday because Kentucky's a team with Oscar Tshiebwe, who he's a rebounding freak. He's a rebounding monster. He can block shots. Alabama's going to be in trouble if they can't attack him or get him in foul trouble early because they're going to need to. They're going to need to get him out of the game some way or some form or fashion. But yeah, Charles Bediako to me is a guy that for Alabama to depend, its ceiling and floor, it really depended on Charles Bediako, Jaden Shackelford, and Keon Ellis, in my opinion. We know what we're going to get out of Javon Quinley because I think now he's really turned it on over the last 2 weeks. He's really begun to really figure out again what he was last year. He's been that engine. But again, Keon Ellis, you got to give Alabama something offensively because I don't think you can ever question defensively what he brings, but offensively you've got to bring something to the table each night. And you go look at the numbers outside of the 2 threes he hit late in the Auburn game. He was like 1 for 9, 1 for 10. And I get Auburn Arena is a very, very tough place to play. I don't think really any realistic Alabama fan thought that Alabama was going to go in there and win, right? But I think now that we look at this team, we kind of took for granted how good last year's team was, right? There was 10 games where they shot over 40% from three last year. Alabama's done that one time this year, one time. And I think we're seeing regression. I think we're seeing a lot of things. But at the end of the day, I mean, this team, again, it's just you only have 4 or 5 contributors from last year here. So there is a lot of inexperience, right? But playing in this big games this year, playing in this tough stretch of games, and the atmosphere will be electric on Saturday night. I wasn't able to be, for the game in Coleman against Baylor, but I heard obviously great things. You could tell on TV. I mean, it was just you could hear Coleman off the TV, and it sounded excellent. But Kentucky will be exciting. But yeah, for Alabama fans, I would be really worried about Oscar Tshiebwe and Kentucky's guards because they provide a nightmare. If they play how they played against Kansas, I don't see anybody beating them.
It's kind of interesting when you look at this Alabama team, and we were talking about the inside presence and they need that, but this team, the additions they have, and Charles Bediako and JD Davison are great players, and they're players you want on your team. They're not Nate Oates players, and that's, I think, they're guys that you had to recruit. But I think the guys you brought in aren't necessarily they're so talented, and if you get a chance to add them, you have to add them, and you'll make them your players, right?
But not the best
like,
for his
Davison. What?
But you're saying like not necessarily the best for his
They're
system.
not like, you don't look at JD Davison and say, man, that is a Nate Oates player. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's going to help to have him. But I think this team almost has like an identity crisis because they lost a lot of like what they need in Nate Oates' system from last year. And then you're having young guys who don't necessarily fit that system that need to learn that system. I'm not saying that this is not me saying that JD Davison was a mistake or that he doesn't belong at Alabama. It's just me saying that like it is making this process harder because he's not, they need more shooters. You know what I'm saying? They need more of that guy. I think, when we look at this team, I think you're really hurt that Primo left. Maybe that was an unexpected thing and good for Josh Primo. I mean, to become a lottery pick, and in the long run, that helps Alabama. But I think when you're building this team and the way Alabama went about things, it's hard to imagine that they didn't expect to have Josh Primo, and how much would that have changed the way that they're able to do things. And so when you're looking at that, and I just think that next year, I think you're going to see more of an addition of like Nate Oates style players, and I think that's going to allow JD Davison with a second year in the program, unless he decides to go pro too.
He's still getting locked in the first round.
Yeah, he's still going to be a first round pick. It depends on if he feels like he can better his stat, and maybe he's just a one and done guy, and if so, good for him as well. But even if he comes back, I think you're going to see a different JD Davison, a more evolved, and then I think you're going to just see things click more for this NATO team. And while talented and while it can beat everyone, I think part of the struggles is it's just not built the way that you would envision a NATO's team being built. And so they're trying to overcome that. And I still think this team, I know it's early, or I know it's late in the season, but it's still to a certain extent learning itself and learning how to make things work, and so it'd be interesting to see if they all click it together. I mean, look, if this stuff happens, right? I mean, I don't expect Charles Bediako to just totally evolutionize his game in the next couple months, nor do I expect, JD Davison to do the same. If they do start to click more, we've already seen how dangerous this Alabama team can be. Like, they could be a really buzzsaw come March.
They can beat anybody or they can lose to anybody in the country. And they'll have a shot again at number 5 Kentucky Saturday night in Coleman Coliseum, 7 p.m. tip on ESPN. Alabama 14-8 on the year, projected around a 5-6 seed right now by Joe Lunardi. Lastly, before we get out of here, Alabama announces a new basketball arena. How exciting. It's everything that everybody's wanted, right? The student seats are close to the court. It's less than 15,000. It's roughly sitting around 10,100 seats. So that's exciting from that angle. It looks beautiful from the renderings online. It's going to be on, and you're not going to feel so far away from the action, right? Golf is also getting a new facility, which looks fantastic. Good for them as well. But the basketball was definitely much needed, and it's just going to accelerate the growth of the sport in this state, and definitely boost Alabama basketball. Katie, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just today during the board meeting, Greg Byrne was saying they had looked around the SEC and around the country and realized Coleman was in the bottom third of the SEC basketball arena wise, and the initial plans, were just to renovate it, but they've decided it's best to rebuild. And I think most people would agree with that. And like you said, it's kind of everything Alabama fans have been wanting. I think maybe it's a little smaller than what some people would want, but I think ultimately it'll be best in the long run, and will be a big help for them recruiting wise and, fan engagement wise, being able to have that type of new arena.
It's also just beautiful, right? I mean, like, you see the renderings and it's just like, it looks really cool. And if I'm a player, I'd want to play in that. You know what I'm saying?
It's a little more aesthetically pleasing and attractive to.
You can repurpose Coleman and allow Nick Saban to park his private jet there. That's probably more what Coleman looks like. This one looks beautiful. I think, now let's see what the renderings, what it looks like when it's all built up. But I personally would be excited to go cover games in here. And if I was a player, I'd be excited to go play games in here. And it's going to help. And it's also going to help keep a coach like Nate Oates around. And, I really, this season's been kind of a roller coaster for Alabama basketball, but you still can't look at Nate Oates and not think that he's building a monster at Alabama basketball. And with this stadium, I think it's going to allow him to do that.
For sure. And you mentioned it earlier, Tony, the number 3 recruiting class coming into the nation. And you go look at those guys, Jaden Bradley, number 1 point guard in the country, Rylan Griffin. Those guys are putting up some points. Those guys are
McDonald's All-Americans.
Yeah. And Nick Pringle, he's the post presence you were talking about as well. But thank you guys for coming on here. For Katie Windham and Tony Tsoukalas, I'm Tyler Martin. This has been another edition of the All Things Bama Podcast.